Hello and welcome back to another exciting episode of Liberty is Peachy. I'm your host, Kenyatta, and in this episode, I'm joined by ACLU of Georgia policy analyst Nicole Robinson. And this is a real treat, folks, because Nicole is going to be able to give us insight into newly proposed legislation that is guaranteed to be an absolute burden to Georgia citizens. Enjoy. So, Nicole, it is such a treat to have you on to the podcast. Thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Yes, and as I said in the intro, it's a real treat because you are our policy analyst. So you are the one that has the insight into really getting down into the details of these bills. So um, we're here to talk about this bill that is going to be an absolute burden to citizens. But what I want to do as far as this conversation to provide context to our listeners is to take us back to the elections of 2020. That way we can really get a feel of how effective and how necessary absentee voting and voting by mail was and how effective it was during this public health crisis. So let's do it. And I'll also add in that I personally voted absentee. So I have a firsthand experience as to the effectiveness and usefulness of it. So taking it back to the 2020 general election. So I know over a million Georgians used vote by mail, correct? Is that right?
Yeah, over 1.3 million citizens in Georgia actually voted by mail during the November election cycle.
Mm-hmm. And to me that's like, okay, obviously, because we have to think about what all was going on at that time. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm sure that as I did, I'm thinking, okay, instead of going out in public to the polls where people have the potential to congregate and gather up, which is not safe for any of us, we're going to use this option that was readily available to us. And I was thankful to have it. Like, okay, well, at least we have this to do, keep everybody safe. So 1.3, you said?
Yes, 1.3 million Georgians voted by mail during the November general election. And like you said, we know that it saved people's lives. The coronavirus
Mm-hmm.
raging in Georgia, hospitalizations are rising, and they were during the November election as well. So we know that it saved lives.
Absolutely. And then move forward again to the two runoffs that we had. And for one thing, already, the awesome thing about the runoff is that a lot of the times, historically, a lot of people don't participate in runoff elections. Is that right? So to have during the pandemic, how many people participated
We had
in
over
the runoff?
and citizens in Georgia voted by mail during the runoff election. And we also had historic turnout during the runoff election, which was
That's right.
wild, given what you said, right? People don't usually participate in runoff elections, especially runoff elections around the holiday
That's
times,
right.
especially adding on a global pandemic, which is they're not factors that we've had to deal with before altogether. So the fact that so many people turned out to vote is really, really incredible.
Absolutely. And that makes me even prouder to know that I participated in this way. So um have the runoffs at the top of this new year. We get through those, another historic turnout.
Yep.
Exciting, exciting, exciting. Legislative session comes, and then boom. What do we get from legislative session regarding absentee ballots? Can you give us some
Yeah.
insight on that?
So we have gotten legislators who have decided instead of celebrating the historic turnout, they want to burden voters. We actually have over 20 bills that have been filed, and we're only on day 12 of our legislative session
Right, right, wow.
that will burden millions and millions of voters, and it'll burden some of our most vulnerable voters as well, including the bill that we're going to talk about a bit more today on absentee voting.
Totally. And I I personally have just been trying to think about certain angles of the rationale here, but to me, all it absolutely does is burden citizens. Like you said, in a time when we should be celebrating history that we've made as Georgians. Um, so there was another interesting fact that I was reading about on this bill.
I will say on the note of absentee voting, what was it,
Mhm.
like 4 in 10
I think
Georgia
that was what.
citizens who voted absentee are from outside the metro Atlanta area, which is a really interesting fact. Turnout in some
That's
parts
what I
of
was gonna
rural
say.
Georgia was higher than it has been in the past. And of course, our democracy works the best when more of our citizens participate. So having
Totally.
a bill that will require people to have a photocopier or a scanner within their home, plus needing access to like reliable broadband, which we know is a huge problem in rural area and in some urban places in the state as well. So bills like this, they make no sense. They're exactly what you said. They're a huge burden on voters.
And you pointed out another thing when it comes to, people living outside of metro areas. And a lot of times when people are older and the
Yes.
people that participated and used the absentee are also, they were older because they were thinking, okay, I'm also the most at risk of catching this virus.
Yeah, so I will add, if I may, that over more than 50% of citizens who voted absentee by mail during the general election were over the age of 65, which,
Mm,
like you're saying, those are the folks who are the most vulnerable. They're in the most vulnerable populations. And again, expecting older citizens to have access to a photocopier and a scanner in their home and to use the internet and be able to submit 2 copies of their photo ID that way, or to have to send it in via like the snail mail, I guess you can call it,
right.
is just, again, it's a burden. It's a huge burden on Georgia citizens and Georgia voters.
Totally. And you bring up another interesting point that I want to ask you about. So when it comes to having to send in this information to the state in order to be able to vote, um, there would be certain like risk factors with that alone, wouldn't there be, Nicole?
Yeah, definitely. So things like this piece of legislation that require a
Hmm.
photocopy of your identification to be able to vote absentee, create really intense privacy concerns for voters. Because just think
Hmm.
about taking a photocopy of your ID. You have to do it twice based on this particular Senate Bill 29, and then put it in the mail, right? So we know identity theft is a huge problem across
Already, yeah.
the country. And so this is just adding another, not just another burden, but another unnecessary risk factor for Georgia
Mhm.
citizens who vote.
Exactly. Nicole couldn't have said it better myself. And I knew when I found out we were gonna have you on, I said this is gonna be a treat because I think that it's so important to give this level of insight and the why to our voters as to why, for this one specifically, this would be a burden to Georgia citizens when it comes to exercising our sacred right to vote, like you said. Um, as we head into, and a lot of people to put them onto the fact that we are heading into elections at the end of this year on a city level statewide. So that's why it's important to be akin to all of this information. So, Nicole, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you'll come back soon. I know as we head into session, I'm sure there'll be other things to talk about.
Oh yeah, I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk about all these things a bit more in depth. Like I
Yes.
said, been well over 20 bills that have been filed that will create insane burdens for Georgia voters and Georgia citizens who vote. So there will definitely be more to talk about going forward, and there will be a lot of opportunities for people who are interested in protecting the right to vote to engage in the legislative
That's right.
process, to be civilian lobbyists, and to make your voices heard, and to tell legislators that we should be celebrating voter turnout. We should not be placing more burdens on Georgians who vote.
Absolutely. Nicole, thanks a million, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, friends, that takes care of another episode. Thanks so much for listening. We've got big fights ahead of us as we go into the 2021 legislative session, and your support is critical. To add your name to be the first to find out how you can take action around causes that matter most to you, visit acluga.org/pledge. To stay up to date on all the work we do here at the ACLU of Georgia, visit acluga.org. And be sure to follow us across social media at ACLU of GA. Last but certainly not least, be sure to follow, rate, like, or subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast. Just give ACLU of Georgia a search. Until next time, this is your host, Kenyatta, reminding you to listen like your rights depend on it.